I was on my knees in the dirt, supervising a routine landscaping installation at Whitestone Equestrian Prep, when I found the evidence. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried. It was paved right into the library walkway, engraved in bronze for the whole world to see. I was brushing soil off a commemorative donor brick when my hand froze. The names etched into the metal weren't strangers. They were Laura and Joseph, my parents. And the inscription beneath their names read, "For Hannah's future." With pride, I stared at the date below the inscription, 2019, the exact same year I had begged them for money to save my daughter's life, and they had looked me in the eye and claimed they were liquid poor. First off, I just want to wish every single one of you a happy, healthy, and beautiful new year 2026. I hope this year brings you so much peace. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community today. The air around me seemed to thin, the sounds of the campus fading into a dull buzz. My fingers traced the cold letters of my sister's name, Hannah, the golden child, the one whose future was apparently worth paving in bronze, while my daughter's future was allowed to expire quietly in a sterile hospital room. I didn't scream. You don't scream when you find a structural crack in a foundation. You assess the damage. I took out my phone, snapped a high-resolution photo of the brick, and stood up. The grief I had carried for 7 years, heavy and suffocating, suddenly evaporated. In its place, a cold, crystalline rage settled in my chest. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a grieving mother anymore. It was the precise, surgical anger of an architect who just realized the blueprint of her entire life was built on a lie. They hadn't been broke. They had been selective, and today, the ledger was finally going to be balanced. To understand the rage, you have to understand the math. 7 years ago, my life was reduced to a series of numbers flashing on a monitor in the ICU. Oxygen saturation, 82%. Heart rate, 140. Price tag for the specific experimental valve surgery that could save my 7-year-old daughter, $54,000. It wasn't a fortune to people like my parents. It was a mid-range luxury sedan. It was a bathroom renovation. But to me, sitting in a plastic chair that smelled of industrial cleaner and despair, it was an impossible sum. I remember the phone call with perfect, high-definition clarity. I was pacing the hospital corridor, my phone pressed to my ear so hard it hurt. I explained the situation to my father, Joseph. I laid it out like a business proposal because I knew that was the only language he respected. I told him about the surgery, the success rates, the timeline. There was a pause on the line, a silence that felt heavy and practiced. Then came the excuse. "Taylor," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "You know our assets are illiquid right now. Everything is tied up in complex trust structures. We'd face massive tax penalties if we tried to move that kind of cash." Illiquid. That was the word he used while my daughter's lips were turning blue. Illiquid. I hung up the phone and walked back into the waiting room. I sat down and, out of pure muscle memory, opened Instagram on my phone. The first post on my feed was from my sister, Hannah. It had been posted 40 minutes ago. The photo was bright, saturated, and perfect. It showed Hannah's daughter, beaming, standing next to a dappled gray pony with a braided mane. The caption read, "Back to school surprise. Welcome to the family, Duchess." Ready for the show season at Whitestone. I stared at the screen. A show pony costs money. Boarding at a stable costs money. The custom tack, the trailer, the lessons, it all costs money. Liquid money. I looked at the timestamp. While I was begging my father for the liquidity to keep a human heart beating, he had wired funds to buy a horse. And here is the part that I have to live with. The part that keeps me awake at night. I didn't call him back and burn the bridge. I put my phone in my pocket, walked back into the ICU, and held Lily's hand while she slept. I accepted their lie. Why? It's a phenomenon called the normalization of cruelty. When you are raised in a house where love is a scarce resource, you are conditioned to believe that you are a burden. You are trained to view your own needs as excessive and your parents' comfort as sacred. I didn't fight for the money because, deep down, a part of me believed them. I believed that my tragedy was an inconvenience they couldn't afford. I believed that disturbing their trust structures was a sin greater than letting my daughter die. I normalized their neglect until it looked like prudence. I was the black sheep, the container for their shame, the one who brought messy, ugly problems like sickness and death to their doorstep. Hannah was the golden child, the external ego, the one who brought ribbons and trophies. Investing in Hannah was investing in their own image. Investing in me was a bad bet. I watched the heart monitor beep. I watched the numbers drop. And I told myself that my parents were just financially tied up. I let them off the hook because I didn't have the strength to see the truth. But looking at that brick today, seeing the date stamped in bronze 2019, the fog finally lifted. They weren't illiquid, they were just selective. And my daughter paid the price for their selection. I didn't storm into the administration building demanding answers. That's what a grieving mother would do. I walked in as the site landscape architect, clipboard in hand, looking for a reason to verify measurements near the lobby. The receptionist barely looked up when I told her I needed to check the clearance for the new indoor planters. I walked straight past the front desk to the patron's wall. It was a massive, mahogany-paneled display featuring brass plaques for the school's top donors. And there it was, not just a brick outside, a plaque, the Joseph and Laura Foundation. I took out my phone and started documenting the scene. High resolution, zoomed-in shots of every single detail. I captured the dates. I captured the donor tier. Diamond Circle. I looked up the donor tier pamphlet sitting on a nearby table. Diamond Circle required a minimum annual contribution of $40,000. I walked back out to my truck, my hands steady, my mind racing. I sat in the driver's seat, pulled a napkin from the glove box, and started doing the math. $42,000 a year for tuition. That was the base. But Whitestone wasn't just a school. It was a lifestyle. I knew Hannah. I knew she wouldn't send her kids there without the full package. Stable fees. I looked up the current rates on the school's website. $24,000 a year for full board and training. Hannah had 2 kids riding now. That was $48,000 a year. Then there were the enrichment trips, the ski week in Aspen, the language immersion in France. I remembered Hannah posting about those. So proud of my little globetrotters, she'd written. Estimated cost. At least $15,000 per child, per year. I added it up. The tuition, the horses, the trips, the uniforms, the mandatory gala tickets. $126,000 a year. Multiply that by 4 years. $504,000. I stared at the number written in blue ink on the napkin. $504,000. 7 years ago, $54,000 would have given Lily a 60% chance of survival. A 60% chance to grow up. A 60% chance to see her 8th birthday. My parents had looked at that number and decided it was too high a price to pay for a maybe. But $500,000 for Hannah's children to learn dressage and French? That was a sound investment. That was building a legacy. The grief that usually sat heavy in my gut was gone. It had been incinerated by the heat of this realization. This wasn't just favoritism. This was a forensic accounting of my daughter's worth in their eyes. To them, Lily was a bad asset, a depreciating stock. Hannah's children were the blue-chip investments that yielded social dividends. I looked at the photos on my phone again, the bronze names, the diamond circle plaque. They hadn't just neglected us. They had actively, systematically diverted $500,000 to polish their image while I was selling my wedding ring to pay for hospice care. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to the source. Chapter 4. The Crystal Facade. The dinner was mandatory. A farewell to the estate before they downsized to the luxury condo in the city. The dining room was exactly as I remembered it, suffocatingly perfect. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, casting fractured rainbows across the table. The heavy scent of roasted lamb and expensive red wine filled the air. I sat across from Hannah. She was scrolling on her phone, looking bored. My mother, Laura, was at the head of the table, rearranging the floral centerpiece for the 3rd time. My father, Joseph, was decanting a 2nd bottle of wine. It's just so stressful, Hannah sighed, dropping her phone onto the table with a clatter. Madison's trainer says she needs a new saddle if she's going to qualify for regionals. Do you know how much a custom CWD saddle costs? It's highway robbery. My mother smiled sympathetically. Oh, honey, I know, but you're doing such a good job. You're a warrior mom, making sure she has the best. It's an investment in her confidence. A warrior mom. I looked down at my hands. They were clean, but rough from the site work. There was a small cut on my thumb from the brick earlier that day. I thought about the definition of a warrior mom. I thought about sleeping in a chair for 3 weeks straight so Lily wouldn't wake up alone. I thought about fighting with insurance adjusters until my voice gave out. Dad, I said, keeping my voice level, How is the retirement fund doing? I know you were really worried about liquidity a few years ago. Joseph stopped pouring. The wine dribbled slightly down the side of the decanter. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. It's fine, Taylor. Why do you ask? Just curious, I said, taking a sip of water. You seemed so stressed about cash flow back in 2019. I was wondering if the market recovered. The market is always fluctuating, he said dismissively. We manage. It's rude to discuss money at the table, Taylor. Rude? Hannah chimed in, picking up her wine glass. Unlike showing up to dinner with dirt under your fingernails. Did you even shower after work? I was working, I said. Building things. You should try it sometime. See? Hannah looked at our mother. She's always so bitter. I'm just trying to have a nice family dinner, and she has to bring this negative energy. I watched them. It was fascinating, really. In sociology, this is the classic golden child, black sheep dynamic. Hannah was the golden child, the external ego of the parents. She was the projection of everything they wanted to be. Wealthy, elite, envy-inducing. Investing in her was investing in their own narcissism. I was the black sheep, the shame container. My life, my work, my tragedy, my dying child was messy. It required empathy, not money. And empathy was a currency they didn't have. They didn't see a daughter across the table. They saw a reminder of a bad investment, a reminder that life could be ugly. And by refusing to help me, they were trying to refuse the reality of that ugliness. I'm not bitter, I said, cutting a piece of lamb. I'm just observant. Well, stop observing and start appreciating, my father snapped. We're celebrating the sale of this house, this legacy. Legacy, that word again. Of course, I said. To the legacy, I raised my glass. They raised theirs. The crystal chimed. It sounded like the bell at the start of a boxing match. They thought the fight was over because I had been silent for 7 years. They didn't know the fight hadn't even started. The next morning, I arrived at the estate early. Not for dinner, but for work. My parents had asked me months ago as a favor, of course to help clear out the old carriage house before the real estate closing. They said it was full of junk they didn't want to pay movers to handle. I had agreed because I was still trying to be the good daughter back then. Now, I was agreeing because I knew exactly what kind of junk my father kept in his home office archives. The carriage house was dusty, smelling of old paper and gasoline. Stacks of banker's boxes lined the back wall. I put on my work gloves, but not to move them. I was there to excavate. I started opening boxes labeled Taxes 2015 to 2020. My father was meticulous. He kept everything, every receipt, every statement, every ledger. It was his way of maintaining control, of proving he was always right. I sifted through the folders. 2017, 2018, 2019. I found a folder labeled Grandchildren's Trust. My breath hitched. They had told me explicitly, to my face, that there were no trusts, that everything was in general accounts. I opened the folder. Inside were monthly statements from a private wealth management firm. I scanned the dates. August 2019, a withdrawal of $14,000. Memo, Whitestone Fall Semester. September 2019, withdrawal, $2,500. Memo, Equine Transport. October 2019, withdrawal, $8,000. Memo, Paris trip, Hannah. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking, not from sorrow, but from the sheer adrenaline of confirmation. The numbers matched my napkin math almost perfectly. But then I found something that made me physically nauseous. A check copy, dated November 14th, 2019. November 13th was the day Lily died. The check was for $12,000. Payable to Whitestone Equestrian Center. Memo, Winter Stabling and Training Package. The day after I buried my daughter, my father wrote a check to board a horse. I sat down on a dusty crate, the paper trembling in my hand. The cruelty wasn't just in the refusal. It was in the timing. They hadn't paused. They hadn't hesitated. The machinery of their prestige continued to grind on, fueled by the money that could have saved her. I took photos of everything, the statements, the check copies, the trust establishment documents that listed Hannah and her children as the sole beneficiaries. I wasn't just gathering proof. I was building a weapon. I found another box, smaller, tucked behind a stack of old magazines. It was labeled Correspondence. I almost ignored it, thinking it would just be old letters. But then I saw a folder inside with Hannah's name on it. I opened it, and that's when I found the smoking gun. The folder was thin, just a few sheets of printed emails stapled together. The subject line read, Taylor, request, advice needed. The date was September 12th, 2019, 2 months before the end. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My father had emailed Hannah, from Joseph to Hannah. Subject, Taylor request, advice needed. Hannah, Taylor called again today. She's asking for $54,000 for the surgery. I know we have the liquidity in the trust, technically. Your mother is wavering. She thinks we should just pay it to stop the crying. What do you think? It's a lot of capital to move right now. I stared at the words. He had considered it. He had actually considered saving her. My mother had wavered. They weren't monsters yet. They were just selfish. But then, I turned the page to read Hannah's reply. From Hannah to Joseph subject. Taylor request. Advice needed. Dad, don't do it. Seriously. You know how Taylor is with money. She's emotional and she's desperate, and she's not thinking clearly. I looked up the surgery. It's experimental. The success rate is low. You're literally throwing good money after bad. If you give her this, she'll just come back for more when it fails. It's a bad investment. Keep the capital for the kids who actually have a future. We need that liquidity for the winter show season and the tuition increase next year. Don't let her guilt trip you. It's sad, but it's a waste. A waste. She called my daughter a waste. I read the email again, and again. The words blurred as my vision tunneled. Hannah hadn't just been a beneficiary of their favoritism. She had been the architect of my daughter's death sentence. She had actively, calculatedly argued against saving Lily's life because she wanted the money for winter show season. She had weighed a human life against a horse show, and she had chosen the horse show. I didn't scream. I didn't tear the paper. I felt a physiological shift, like a switch flipping deep inside my brain. The grief that had defined me for 7 years, the sadness that had made me soft and pliable, simply vanished. In its place was something cold, hard, and absolute. I carefully folded the email and placed it in my pocket. I took the photos of the checks, the bank statements, the trust documents. I had everything I needed. I walked out of the carriage house and into the bright, indifferent sunlight. The birds were singing. The landscaping crew was working on the hedges. The world looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but it wasn't. Hannah wasn't my sister anymore. She was a target, and my parents weren't my family. They were co-conspirators. I got into my truck and sat there for a moment, watching the house. Tonight was the closing dinner with the real estate agents. They were celebrating the sale, the profit, the next chapter of their perfect lives. They thought they were untouchable. I started the engine. You wanted a return on investment, Hannah, I whispered to the empty cab. You're about to get one. The closing dinner was held at the estate's formal dining room. One last time. The real estate agents, a sleek couple named Mark and Sarah, were there, sipping champagne and calculating their commission. My parents were radiant, practically vibrating with the relief of downsizing to a $3 million penthouse. Hannah was there, of course, scrolling through Zillow looking for vacation homes. I walked in 20 minutes late. I wasn't wearing my work boots this time. I was wearing a black dress, sharp and severe. I carried a single, leather-bound book in my hands. I had paid a rush fee at the print shop to have it bound beautifully. The title was embossed in gold on the cover. The Cost of a Legacy. Taylor, my mother chirped, her smile tight. So glad you could make it. We were just toasting to the sale. I brought a closing gift, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. I walked to the table and placed the book in front of my mother. But I didn't stop there. I pulled 4 more copies from my tote bag. I slid one to Mark, one to Sarah, one to Hannah's husband, Greg, and one to Hannah. What is this? Hannah asked, frowning at the cover. Open it, I said. It's a memoir, a financial history of this family. Mark, the agent, opened his copy first. He was polite, expecting a photo album. His smile faltered as he landed on the first page, the photo of the donor brick at Whitestone, 2019. Turn the page, I instructed. They turned. Page 2. A side-by-side comparison. Left side, Lily's hospital admission form, dated September 2019. Right side, the bank statement showing a $14,000 withdrawal for Whitestone fall semester. Taylor, this is inappropriate, my father growled, standing up. We have guests. Sit down, Joseph, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. The authority in my voice was absolute. We're discussing liquidity. Hannah was staring at the book, her face draining of color. She had reached the middle section, the receipts, the pony, the tack, the trips, the total sum printed in bold at the bottom of page 20, $504,000. You told me you had no liquidity, I said to my parents. You told me the money was tied up. But here it is, $500,000, liquid enough to buy a horse, liquid enough to buy prestige, just not liquid enough to buy a heartbeat. We did what we thought was best, my mother whispered, her hand trembling over the page. The surgery was risky. Turn to the last page, I said. Hannah's husband, Greg. You might want to read this one carefully. Greg turned the page. It was the email. The kill shot. Don't do it, Dad. It's a bad investment. Save it for the kids who actually have a future. Greg read it. He read it twice. Then he looked at Hannah. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was revulsion. He looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. You said you didn't know, Greg said, his voice quiet. You told me you didn't know Taylor asked for money. You told me Mom and Dad were broke. I was protecting the family assets, Hannah shrieked, slamming the book shut. She was going to waste it. Lily was dying anyway. The silence that followed was absolute. The real estate agents were staring at the table, wishing they could dissolve into the floor. My father looked old, suddenly, deflated. I'm not the investment you wanted, I said, looking at my parents. I'm not the golden child. I'm the bill that's finally due. You invested in an image. You invested in a pony. And you got what you paid for. A hollow legacy and a daughter who would sell her own niece for a saddle. I turned to the agents. The house is lovely, but the foundation is rotten. Good luck with the sale. I walked out. I didn't look back. I heard my mother sobbing. I heard Greg asking Hannah, "Who are you?" But I didn't stop. I walked out into the cool night air, and for the first time in 7 years, I took a breath that filled my lungs completely. The yellow daisies were Lily's favorite. She called them sunshine flowers. I knelt in the dirt of my own small garden, pressing the roots of a new daisy plant into the soil. It was quiet here, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the distant hum of traffic. It had been 3 months since the dinner. I hadn't spoken to any of them. I had blocked their numbers before I even left the driveway that night. But in a small town, news travels fast, especially scandalous news. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that the sale of the estate fell through. Mark and Sarah, the agents, withdrew from the listing, citing ethical concerns, and word got around the country club set faster than wildfire. My parents were social pariahs. The generous philanthropists were now known as the people who let their granddaughter die to buy prestige. They were stuck in the big, empty house, isolated by their own choices. Hannah's life imploded even faster. Greg filed for divorce 2 weeks after the dinner. He cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the real reason. He couldn't stay married to a woman who had advocated for a child's death. He took the kids. He took the ponies. Hannah was living in a rental apartment, posting vague, victimized quotes on social media that nobody liked. I patted the dirt around the daisy, wiping my hands on my jeans. I wasn't happy about their destruction. That's a common misconception about revenge. You don't feel joy when the tower falls. You just feel relief that the shadow is gone. I felt light. I felt clean. For years, I had thought that being an orphan while my parents were still alive was the worst thing that could happen to me. I thought cutting ties was a failure. But as I sat there in the sun, I realized that letting go of bloodlines wasn't a loss. It was an act of survival. I had spent my life trying to buy their love with my compliance, with my silence. I had let them normalize their cruelty until I almost believed I deserved it. But I didn't. Lily didn't. We are taught that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But sometimes, blood is just a biological accident. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is look at the people who share your DNA and say, I choose me. I chose myself. I chose the truth. And in doing so, I finally built a legacy that Lily would have been proud of. I stood up, brushing the soil from my knees. The sun was warm on my face. The garden was blooming. It wasn't a perfect life. It was messy and quiet and sometimes lonely. But it was mine, and the price of admission had been paid in full. If you've ever had to choose your own peace over your family's expectations, hit that share button, and I truly hope 2026 is the year you finally put yourself first. Wishing you all a bright, happy, and healing new year.